Today, we're going to talk about one of the core foundations of any mix, and that is dynamics. Specifically, we're going to talk about one of the ways you can control the dynamics of your mix in a different way than you're probably used to. You're probably used to using a compressor to control the dynamic range of your signal. And compressors are a fantastic tool because they not only control the dynamic range, but they can also add some color and tone to your signal. And when you use it the right way, can do some amazing things in your mix. But compression isn't the only tool you can use to control the dynamics, and in some cases, it's not the best tool for the job. That's where a Xrider plugin like Xrider comes in really handy. This is a really wild dynamic processor with a completely different workflow than you're probably used to seeing. So in this video, I'm going to break down exactly how it works, and I'm going to show you 3 of my favorite uses for Xrider that you can try in your mixes as well. First off, let's talk about what Xrider even is. Xrider is a unique type of dynamic processor that allows you to set a target gain, and then it will turn up or down your signal transparently to achieve that target gain. In other words, Xrider is analyzing your signal level in real time and then applying transparent gain to either turn up or down your signal. So let's play some signal through it and take a look at what we're seeing.
Visceral, it's physical, I like to know it's good. On your side, let's cross the line, I like to think I could be. But if I'm...
So the first thing we notice is this big waveform display. And we can see it has the true gain line overlaid. That's this blue line. And this is showing us exactly what the Xrider is doing over time. It's showing us whether it turned it up or turned it down. And the way it's laid out is really helpful because we can see it up against the waveform itself. So you might be asking yourself, isn't this just a compressor? It's a good question. And in order to answer it, we have to understand how a compressor works. A compressor reduces the dynamic range of a signal after it's crossed a threshold. So in other words, when a signal is louder than a threshold, it will apply dynamic control. But when the signal is softer than the threshold, it won't do anything. Compare this to Xrider. With Xrider, we're setting a target gain, and that's this yellow line here. This is the target gain that we want our signal to be at. When the signal is louder than the target gain, it's going to turn it down. This is somewhat similar to a compressor. But when the signal is softer than the target gain, it's actually going to turn it up. And this is not similar to a compressor. And you can imagine you're going to get very different results when you compare the two. But there's another huge difference here between Xrider and a compressor, and it has to do with the other controls we have with Xrider. Listen to what happens when we adjust the speed.
Visceral, it's physical, I like to know it's good. On your side, let's cross the line, I like to think I could be. But if I wanna be...
So when we set a really fast speed, we can see that the true gain line becomes very responsive. It's almost like we're hyper controlling the dynamics very precisely, and it gives us this sort of very compressed sound. That's because the Xrider is moving very quickly to adjust the gain and reach that target gain line. But when we slow it down, we're gonna see a much more gradual and slow true gain line. This is going to act more like if we had a finger on a fader and we were just kind of adjusting the level as we hear it in a much more gentle way.
Visceral, it's physical, I like to know it's good. On your side, let's cross the line, I like to think I could be.
So you can see here, it's a much more gentle and natural adjustment of the level. And this you wouldn't really be able to do with a compressor. With Xrider, we have much finer control over the speed, and that allows us to get everything from very natural level adjustments all the way to very fast and hyper precise adjustments. So not only that, we also have this sensitivity, and this allows us to make the Xrider more reactive to the incoming signal or a little bit less reactive if we wanted to just catch some of the peaks. Take a look at what happens when we push this sensitivity up.
Visceral, it's physical, I like to know it's good. On your side, let's cross the line, I like to think I could be.
So now this Xrider is very sensitive. It's looking at every signal and it's adjusting the gain accordingly. But let's bring it back down.
Visceral, it's physical, I like to know it's good. On your side, let's cross the line, I like to think I could be.
So now when we bring this sensitivity lower, we're getting a lot less riding happening. We're just really pulling down some of those peaks. And so we can fine tune exactly how much sensitivity works for this particular vocal.
Visceral, it's physical, I like to know it's good. On your side, let's cross the line, I like to think I could be.
So right now this is producing a pretty natural result. It's very precise, more precise than we would get by riding a fader, but it still sounds very natural. It doesn't sound like we hyper compressed it. And that's the power of adjusting the sensitivity and the speed in combination. So before we get into my 3 favorite uses for Xrider in a mix, I want to show you a couple more controls. These max and min sliders. These purple handles act as a limit for the Xrider. So if we set this to, let's say 7.5, that means that the most Xrider is ever going to turn up or down the signal is by 7.5 dB. So even if the signal is 10 dB softer than the target, it's only going to turn it up 7.5 dB. So what this means is we can have extremely precise control over how Xrider is going to adjust to the dynamics. The first and most popular way to use a tool like Xrider is to perform automatic vocal rides. A vocal ride is where you adjust the level of the vocal, usually in small amounts, to give it that final bit of dynamic control so that it always sits perfectly in the mix. Of course, you've already done all your compression and other processing. This is just the final touch to make sure that it's always sitting perfectly in the mix. Vocal rides are very common. They've been done pretty much since the beginning of multi-track recording. It's just that Xrider makes it so much easier and more precise to do. For this, we're going to put Xrider last in the chain on the vocal. And then we're going to set it so that it only adjusts by maybe a dB or two in either direction. We don't want to do big sweeping adjustments to the level. We just want to tuck it in a little bit. We'll set the target gain so that sometimes the true gain line is up, sometimes it's down.
Visceral, it's physical, I like to know it's good. On your side, let's cross the line, I like to think I could be. But if I wanna be.
So we can see that sometimes the true gain line is above the target gain. That means it's turning it up. Sometimes it's below. That means it's turning it down. That usually means we have a pretty good target gain setting. Now remember that these minimum and maximum controls are just the limits. It means it's not going to go more than that. But it doesn't mean that it's always going to go 2 dB up or down. It's going to do what it needs to do to reach that target gain line. Now, if you want it to be even more subtle, try adjusting the speed down.
Visceral, it's physical, I like to know it's good. On your side, let's cross the line, I like to think I could be.
So now it's really only doing about a half a dB of gain in either direction, and it's a much more subtle ride. So that's the first use for Xrider as a automatic vocal ride tool. My next favorite use for Xrider is as a pre-compressor dynamic control. So for this, I'm going to place Xrider before any compression is happening in the chain. So why would you want to do this? Well, sometimes if you're planning to compress a signal, and that signal is very dynamic, meaning it gets very loud and very soft, then sometimes it's going to be hard to set the compressor to a setting that makes sense. Either it's going to be slamming when those loud parts come in, or it's not going to do anything during the soft parts. And overall, that compressor is going to have to work really hard on the vocal, and it's probably not going to sound very natural. So right now we've got Xrider before Xvox Pro in our chain, and this is going to be doing some transparent gain adjustments before it hits this compressor. And take a look at what happens. If we take Xrider off temporarily, we're going to see this gain reduction meter have to work quite a bit harder.
Visceral, it's physical, I like to know it's good. On your side, let's cross the line, I like to think I could be. Visceral, it's physical, I like to know it's good. On your side, let's cross the line, I like to think I could be.
So we can see that with Xrider engaged, the compressor isn't having to work quite as hard, and that's going to give us an easier time when we're setting it, trying to get a more natural sound. The third way I like to use Xrider is as a creative dynamic control. And because of the way it works by turning up and down the signal, you can get some really unique effects. For example, let's say I want to push this sample to the front and just make it sound so much bigger. If we were doing this with a compressor, we would have to really slam it, and that's going to give it kind of a certain sound that maybe we don't want. We want it to still sound natural and breathe a little bit. Take a listen. So you can see how we're kind of flattening the dynamics out, but in doing so, it's bringing out all the tiny little details in this sound that's just making it sound even bigger.
Visceral, it's physical, I like to know it's good. On your side, let's cross the line, I like to think I could be.
I love how that sounds. It really elevates this track. So that's a deep dive into Xrider, how it works, and a few of my favorite uses for it in a session. I hope you found this helpful and maybe inspiring to try some new things in your own mixes. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like, subscribe for more tutorials like this, and as always, happy mixing.